From an obscure legal academic to Trump's enabler-in-chief, John Eastman experienced a swift and sudden rise to become one of the most influential voices in Trump's orbit just prior to the insurrection. Joining us now is Maggie Haberman, CNN political analyst and Washington correspondent for the New York Times, who's got a terrific article out over the weekend with Michael Schmidt on John Eastman, a lawyer that Trump found on Fox News.
Right.
Once he found him, though, and brought him into the orbit, talk to me about the timeline around the memo he wrote, the literal blueprint for overthrowing an election.
So it's fascinating when Eastman says that he was asked by Trump to write this memo because it was around Christmas last year. Now, that is after the election has already been, the electors are going for Joe Biden, and we know this, that's the December 14th date. Then December 18th, there's this wild meeting in the Oval Office that I broke at the time about Sidney Powell and Mike Flynn are there with the CEO of Overstock arguing that Trump can actually seize the voting machines and rerun the election. He doesn't go with that. A number of his advisors were arguing against it. It was a very emotional meeting. But so several days later, Trump, according to Eastman, reaches out to Eastman and says, please give me this plan for how you do this. Now, Trump doesn't typically ask for memos that way, so I'm a little skeptical that the conversation went quite that way, but he does produce this piece of paper, and that became the basis for what Trump was using to push Pence to not certify the election for Joe Biden and to certify it for Trump. The thing about the memo is the original plan was this required alternate slates of electors from these states. No state put such an alternate slate forward. So then suddenly the conversation a couple of days beforehand, and in a meeting on January 4th with Eastman and Trump and Pence's counsel and chief of staff, suddenly it becomes, well, can you delay it? And so that was clearly the backup plan.
The other interesting thing from your article that jumped out at me was the man who wrote a blueprint for how to overthrow an election is still very much involved with the political future of Donald J. Trump.
He's still talking to him. I mean, I think that he's one of these people who is still in his orbit. I think he would like to be more involved, candidly, than he actually is, because right now you have Trump with a wide array of legal matters before him. Eastman is not in the inner circle, although Trump's inner circle is a bit diffuse right now. But he certainly has not been banished, like somebody, say, Sidney Powell has.
I want to ask you about something the former president said about Ron DeSantis, because he's been, I don't know, a little circumspect when asked directly about possible 2024 opponents. But listen to what he told Yahoo News in an interview over the weekend, Yahoo Finance. If I faced him, Ron DeSantis, I'd beat him like I would beat everybody else. I don't think I will face him. I think most people would drop out. I think he would drop out.
It's fascinating to me that he addressed it this way for a variety of reasons. But one, as you say, is he's been pretty careful about what he's said, not just about the other candidates, but about DeSantis. He has generally been sort of, not gingerly, but he's barely gone there. This is sounding like somebody who is heeding what some of his own advisors are saying, what Trump's advisors are saying, which is DeSantis may run against you, even if you decide to run. And there is this open question of, does Trump run, number one, and then if he does anyone else challenge him? And so he is clearly laying down a marker with DeSantis here.
Wonder how Ron DeSantis would respond to that.
My guess is the reality is DeSantis would not challenge Trump, but I doubt that he likes being boxed in this way.
So the former president's not on Twitter because Twitter has banned him.
Not. Right.
Twitter has banned him.
Right.
And in interviews and in discussions, the former president likes to say, oh, he doesn't miss Twitter at all. He likes the free time. Nevertheless, he's asking a federal judge to force Twitter to get him back on.
Right. Typically, people who are actually enjoying their respite from social media don't sue to get back on social media. So that's one corner of it, which is it's hard to believe what he's saying about how happy he is with his new statement, plan where he blasts these statements out several times a day. It raises an interesting question because Twitter banned him, we know, after January 6th. If he isn't a candidate next time, I'm sure they're going to stick with that. If he is a candidate next time, they're going to come under enormous pressure to put him back on, and how they respond to that is going to be pretty interesting.
That's a Twitter thing, more than a Trump thing.
100%, but the impact is going to be the same.
I want to ask you about Donald Trump's former campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, who had been involved with one of these super PACs around Trump and has been basically pushed out because of an interaction he had with a fundraiser. This is Trishelle Odom, a Republican donor, and you wrote an article about this. She says that Lewandowski repeatedly touched me inappropriately, said vile and disgusting things to me, stalked me, and made me feel violated and fearful. I'm coming forward because he needs to be held accountable. Now, like I said, he's been pushed aside from the super PAC. Why this? and not everything else from Corey Lewandowski over the last 6 years?
So it's a good question, and just one note of clarity: they're in the process of pushing him out because they technically can't oversee personnel changes at the super PAC. As far as I understand it, Lewandowski has not been going willingly, and so I think we're going to see more developments on that. In terms of why this, there's a couple of things. It's been literally, as you and I both know, 5 years of people around Trump trying to, separate Trump from Lewandowski, for whom Trump has a huge soft spot. And I'm not convinced this is the end of Lewandowski. It's just the end of Lewandowski at this entity and with this money, at least in Trump land. There's a couple of factors, though. One is that there are people who have been trying to focus on his outside clients and suggested that he was mishandling that, or that he was sort of making himself the face of access to Trump in exchange for other, or not in exchange, but at least for the ability to get other clients in service of himself. Now, almost everyone around Trump has their own clients at this point, so that's not unusual, but people have zeroed in on that. There is a difference that somebody is saying this on the record, but I think it's also people trying to basically, warn Trump that if you run again, there are going to be these distractions, and this can't be one. But again, I just want to reiterate, we've seen this movie before with other staff. Maybe not to this degree. The things that are said in that complaint are really ugly, and so we'll see if that has, durability with Trump. But most things don't.